Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday's edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, here to bring you or take you through Thursday's openers in SEC baseball. We've reached the point where we're going to have some Thursday games, which is great. I enjoy, getting to spread the weekend out a little bit more so you can pay a little more attention to individual games there with games a little more spread out. So we love that. I'm also going to get you ready for all of the series openers that begin today, Friday, around the conference. Before we do any of that, though, I have to remind you that this episode of Weekend Waypoints and every episode of Weekend Waypoints is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing fun with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1-hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com orders. Let's get into it. A busy Thursday, not so much just because of the baseball, but the combination of a full day of hoops. I don't know about you guys, but I love college basketball as well. Obviously, it was a big year for SEC basketball, so there's a lot of intrigue there within the conference. A couple of tough losses for SEC teams yesterday, but for the most part, playing well. I had a comment in here from Michael Broussard. Morning, Joe. Good morning, Michael. Fun day of hoops yesterday with a great Tennessee-Bama nightcap. That is a great segue, Michael, because yes, that was a great baseball game between Tennessee and Alabama that I had on as I kept one eye on the basketball as well. Really fun game. Weird to see Tennessee the last two games, I should say, on a 2-game losing streak, if you want to call 2 games a streak, but just, they've been so impenetrable the first 21 games of the season, and to see them lose 2 in a row in both close games, like nothing, I'm not trying to create alarm. That's not what I'm doing here. It's just, they were so good for the first 5 weeks that it was just kind of weird to see them look a little human. And specifically in yesterday's 6-5 loss to Alabama, seeing Liam Doyle look really human. Last week against Florida did a nice job against him, but Doyle's stuff was so good that he was able to work out of trouble and work around base runners and just kind of survive and navigate it. And not quite so much yesterday against Alabama. 5-run inning for Alabama. No surprise that Justin LeBron had the big hit there, a bases clearing double as part of that 5-run inning. So kudos to Bama for sticking to it after they fell behind 3-0 early. And I think for a lot of folks, myself included, I kind of thought, well, okay, that's probably about it. But no, Alabama came back, fought Liam Doyle, scored enough runs to ultimately get the job done. Zane Adams on the other side, not perfect. You're never going to be against a lineup as good as Tennessee's, but I thought battled really well and got his team deep into the game with a chance to win it. So a fun game. I also don't think this is the worst thing in the world for Tennessee. I mean, yes, you want to win every game, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have some to get some pushback at this time of year, right? Because ultimately you're not going to get through SEC play undefeated. You're not going to get through SEC play without having some games where you just didn't play your best. You're going to take some losses. And so learning how to deal with that and bounce back from that now versus May, I think is not the worst thing in the world. So I think they'll bounce back strong this weekend. Doesn't mean that Alabama can't win one more game this weekend and win the series. Certainly, having Riley Quick on the mound in one of those games is going to be helpful. This Alabama offense has been swinging it pretty well. That's helpful. Justin LeBron, is the best player on the field. That's helpful. So Alabama can absolutely win this series now that they've won this one game, but it also wouldn't be a surprise if Tennessee comes out a little bit on fire, at least in game 2 of the series here. So should be fun to watch, but a heck of a game on Thursday to get that series started. Earlier in the day, just a little earlier in the day, 30 minutes before, Vanderbilt and Texas A&M got underway. Vanderbilt wins it 5-3. Another tough loss for Texas A&M. Those struggles continue. And it was a little bit of the same things we've seen for Texas A&M. Offense just didn't really get going. Jace Laviolette, a 2-run home run in the first inning. And you're like, okay, hey, we're, A&M's off to the races here. Like their best player got a big hit. Maybe today's going to be different. Nope. 1 run the rest of the game. And they lose at 5-3. Connor Fennell, a pitcher for Vanderbilt, a Dayton transfer, came over with Jason King, who is the head coach at Dayton now, the hitting coach for Vanderbilt this season. Not going to blow your doors off with velocity. On the TV gun, it was like 87, 88. But man, he's got good command of his secondary pitches. He's got a lot of swing and miss in those off-speed pitches. He's kind of funky. Like there's some fuzz, as they would say. Like it's just kind of a funky delivery, and so everything's kind of moving, and it's not a fun pitcher to face. So other than the Laviolette home run, he pitched really well, struck out 8 in 3 2/3 innings. I thought he did really well in that spot. Vanderbilt going with him as opposed to just starting the rotation a day early. Every team kind of treats these Thursday games a little differently in terms of, do we use our Friday guy? Do we use somebody else as an opener? Do we, there's a lot of ways to approach that. They went with Fennell, and I think it paid off. I think he did a really nice job, and Sawyer Hawks was awesome on the back end for basically perfect innings. Gave up 1 hit, and that was it. Struck out 6. He's just been a different pitcher this year. Went through a lot last year. Now looks like the guy that we expected him to be last year when he arrived at Vanderbilt. So that's awesome to see that he's pitching well. Vanderbilt, the other wrinkle here is that Vanderbilt got to Ryan Prager, and look, again, that's going to happen even with somebody as good as Ryan Prager. 9 hits, scoring 5 runs against Prager. Jacob Humphrey with a big hit, a 3-run homer in the 3rd from the leadoff spot. So the thing about that, though, is that A&M has to hope that's a one-off. And if I had to bet, I would say it is. But A&M has to hope that's a one-off, or if the pitching starts to backslide for A&M, they're really in trouble, because that's really what's held them up, to the extent they've been held up by anything. That's really what's kind of kept them afloat and kept them competitive, and has given at least me optimism that, hey, like, it's not going to take miracles for this team to be maybe not as good as we thought they could be. I think that's off the table now. But to at least be postseason good, right? It's like, the pitching just needs to be itself, and the hitting just has to come along a little bit. Well, if that dynamic is going to change, it makes that path a lot tougher for the Aggies. So something to watch as we move forward. We had a comment here. Adam LeMarie, can LSU win at least 2 out of 3 in Texas this weekend? Yeah, I guess we'll start with that series. Because it's I wrote about it, SEC Series of the Week. You can read that on the site at d1baseball.com. My little preview on it. But it is the series to watch this weekend for me. 2 top 10 teams. First SEC series in Austin. Should be a great atmosphere there. With Texas men's basketball out, maybe some more eyeballs on it, although women's are obviously still playing as a number 1 seed. But still should be great atmospheres. I imagine LSU will travel relatively well, given that I'm sure there are plenty of LSU alums in Central Texas, or even as far away as Louisiana. It's not a terrible drive. Austin's a nice place to spend a weekend, so perhaps there will be a good Tigers contingent there as well. My big question there is, neither rotation has a lot of experience in these SEC games. Texas kind of obviously, because it's their first year in the league, but also it's not even like they have in their rotation a lot of Big 12 experience coming from last year. So it's not even just like, well, yeah, these guys pitched in the Big 12, but not the SEC. No, they're leaning on Jared Spencer, a transfer from the Missouri Valley Conference, Luke Harrison, a guy who's been mostly injured the last couple of years, and then, a TBA on Sunday, which, very likely is a freshman. So, and then for LSU, it's, Kate Anderson, who has the most experience, and then Ianson and Shores, who, for the same kind of similar to Texas, you have Ianson, a transfer, and Shores, a guy who's dealt with injury. Which rotation deals with the moment better is going to be a question. I liked what Texas's pitching did last weekend against Mississippi State. The jury's still out on how good Mississippi State is, so we'll see. But with LSU's rotation, Missouri's offense did more against them than I thought they would. It's a Missouri offense that's expected to be the least productive in the league. They were last year, and they would have to improve significantly over last year to not finish in most offensive categories this year. But I thought they did a pretty good job against LSU. They were pretty competitive offensively in that series. So for LSU, is that a one-off? Was that a, hey, we're just kind of adjusting to SEC play? It just feels a little different, maybe. But if it is a struggle to adjust, that's obviously an issue for LSU. Now, LSU's depth is such that you've got plenty of other potential answers, if you want to move stuff around, right? You've got these really talented freshmen You've got some returners who have kind of been in a few more SEC games. The depth will improve when Gavin Guidry comes back. So it's not to say LSU would even have to panic, even if they do feel like they need to make a change in the rotation. But it is something to watch because that Missouri offense did a pretty nice job against LSU starters. So what do we get this time around from them? So that's but to answer your question more directly, Adam, yeah, I think they can. Like I think they can win 2 games there. I love the LSU offense. Texas has a good offense of its own, but LSU's is better at this point. The depth on the position player group is incredible to where they can play a lot of different matchups. They probably have 12 or 13 guys they trust to be in the lineup on a given day. So they really can just kind of mix and match with whoever they think gives them the best opportunity that day. And I'd go back to last weekend where Michael Braswell, and I talked about this on last weekend's shows, you know, he's kind of been in a platoon this year after being the everyday guy at shortstop last year. And he's at a platoon at a number of different positions. He could play third, he could play short, maybe he could play second. He's not necessarily locked into one place. But he starts every game last weekend, all 3 against Missouri, and goes 3 for 9, draws a couple walks. It was a nice weekend for him offensively, even though he's only hitting like in the low 200s. And it just goes to show that's the kind of depth they have. A guy who started every single game last year, essentially at shortstop and had a nice year, is in a platoon. And that just tells you the kind of depth they have. Donovan Adams came in here asking about LSU and Texas series. Yeah, it's actually what I'm talking about now, Donovan. Like, I forget. I honestly, hand to heart, I forget who I picked in the series on our on our staff picks. To be honest, because I think I'd gone back and forth on it. I believe I picked LSU, but go to the site when those get posted today to find out for sure. I will do the same because I genuinely can't remember. I know I went back and forth on it, so should be a lot of fun in Austin this weekend. Jeremy Scott, who I know is a Tide fan here, he comes in with a roll Tide. 4-0 start to SEC play for the first time since 2003. Good factoid there, Jeremy. Yeah, I mean, look, Mark and I talked on Highway to Hoover over the weekend, at the end of last weekend, about how, you know, Alabama doing what they did to A&M makes the math pretty positive for Alabama, where they could even lose the series this weekend, which now, you know, they're in the catbird seat for it. But even if they lose the series and you say you're 4-2 against A&M and Tennessee to begin the season, if you'd have given Alabama that before the season, now we didn't know A&M would struggle so much before the season, but in general, if you give them 4-2 the first 2 weekends, they'd take it 10 out of 10 times. And that's true of every team in the SEC probably against that competition. So, but if you win this one and you're looking at a 5-1, like now you're really cooking. And then we'd have to, I think, upwardly adjust maybe our expectations for Alabama. Because I think we're all still, myself included, I'll just speak for myself. Like, I really like this Alabama team. I saw them down in Jacksonville a few weeks ago. I wrote about them down in Jacksonville a few weeks ago. So I really like them, but there's just still a part of me that's like, let's see, you know, I have my questions about the bullpen. Like, let's see how sustainable this is. Is this just a really strong start? I'll be watching, obviously, to see whether I'm right to still be pulling back a little bit, or whether I should be going all in with this team, because I'm tempted. Let me tell you, they're playing really, really well right now. It's also just a likable team. Like, that's part of it too. Like, clearly they enjoy each other. They're having a lot of fun. They've got some personality. So it's just a fun team in general on top of that. Other series here, we'll just kind of rapid fire through them with some notes along the way. Georgia's going to Florida. Florida continues to be beat up. Liam Peterson getting skipped this weekend. That's obviously no bueno. Precautionary, supposedly. But they're still down Pierce Capola. They're hopeful he's getting back to throwing, or perhaps by the time you see this, he is throwing a little bit, but he's not back in a starting role this weekend. That puts freshman Aiden King in the Friday spot. And look, he showed last weekend against Tennessee. Maybe he's ready for that, but it's a big spot, obviously, for a freshman to be there. So Florida's just going to have to fight through it right now. I still like this team enough to where I don't think this is a team that's going to fall off a cliff, but it didn't get any easier after they saw Tennessee last weekend. They're now getting Georgia. Obviously, Georgia, go back and listen to the Highway to Hoover episode this past week with Anthony Dasher, who covers the team for UGAsports.com. You know, we talked a lot about the pitching issues, and Florida is, even though they are a little beat up, Florida's still going to test your pitching staff, no matter who you are. So what does Georgia get on the mound? That's going to be a big question for them this weekend against the Gators. Let's flip over to some comments here. Rob Sargent. coming in with a flurry of comments there, including one that just says baseball with a bunch of L's at the end, which I agree. Auburn at Kentucky. Little wrinkle here. I became aware of this morning as I take a sip of my water. Pardon me. When Mark and I are on our podcast, when he's talking, I get a chance to take a sip of water. But when it's just me, I have to kind of rudely do it in the middle of sentences and what have you. A little bit of a wrinkle this weekend for Auburn and Kentucky in Lexington. Auburn's men's basketball team is playing at Rupp Arena this weekend and doesn't play again until tomorrow. So they're free tonight. And so I talked to someone around the Kentucky program this morning, and they're anticipating a lot of Auburn fans at the ballpark. So that home field advantage, you'll still have some home field advantage because it's your place. There's the comfort level, all that stuff. But it's not going to be quite as much of a home field advantage as it might otherwise be, because there will be a bunch of Auburn fans in the building at Kentucky Proud Park. So that is a little bit of a wrinkle there. Some questions I have: can Kentucky produce offensively like it did in Athens? Or is that kind of an Athens phenomenon? Because Athens, there's weekends like that happen in Athens when that ballpark is playing really small. So you're not going to, even if you're swinging it as well as you were in Athens, you're probably not going to put up as many runs because it's just a different ballpark playing differently. But the point is, can they continue to produce at a high level? Because if they produce at that kind of level, they're going to win a lot of ball games in the SEC, because I do like the pitching. And I wouldn't read too much into last weekend from a pitching standpoint for Kentucky because of the aforementioned Foley Field effect. And then for Auburn, looking for Sam Dutton to continue what he's done. He's impressed me so much with the way he's broken out for this Auburn team. And they need it when you consider that Cade Fisher's not been the best version of himself, hasn't thrown a ton of innings. There's a lot of freshmen and a lot of new faces getting worked into that Auburn pitching mix. So him being as good as he's been has been huge. Can he continue to do that? Obviously, the Auburn lineup without Ike Irish is still a storyline, but I'm pretty confident the Auburn lineup's going to hit regardless, because that's what they've done so far this season. All right. Ole Miss at Mizzou. Really the big question here is, does Ole Miss get got in Columbia? Because one team does every year. You can pretty much set your watch to it. No matter how much Mizzou is struggling in a given year, it will get a team at home. Columbia, Missouri is a hard place to play. It's usually pretty chilly. I checked. The weather is actually not going to be too bad from a temperature perspective, but it is going to be windy, and it's even windier in that ballpark. And the ballpark plays huge, so it's easy to get frustrated as an offense that the ball is just not carrying the way it does a lot of other places. Last year, Florida got in Columbia. The year before, Tennessee got in Columbia. Again, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of, is it Ole Miss now or is it somebody else later? That's the big question there. And for Missouri, I mentioned earlier in the show, they swung it pretty well against LSU pitching. Does that continue this weekend against Ole Miss? How much are they able to? And then how does Ole Miss bounce back from a tough weekend last weekend? A winnable series at home. You just couldn't close out Arkansas. And so that's a tough way to lose that series. How do they bounce back? That's going to have a lot to do with how they play this weekend. South Carolina at Arkansas. What does the Arkansas rotation give us? We've talked about Gabe Gackle not quite looking himself. He was better last week in general. Still not as dominant as I think many of us thought he was going to be. But then Zach Root really struggled. So does he bounce back from that? You're obviously still down Gage Wood. So Landon Beidelshees has been in the rotation. He's done a really nice job, but obviously it's one fewer option than you had to start the year. So what do the Razorbacks look like on the mound? I know there's a lot of worry about that with Arkansas fans, because I was pinch hitting for Aaron on our D1 baseball chat on Monday and got a lot of questions about Arkansas pitching. So clearly there is some concern there, and understandably so, because that was thought to be the one thing about this team that you weren't ever going to have to worry about, was the starting pitching. And now South Carolina, the math gets tough, because similar to Ole Miss last week, losing Arkansas, it thought it maybe should have had, certainly could have had. South Carolina has to feel the same way about its series last weekend against Oklahoma, a series it could have won, maybe should have won, and just didn't. And so now I'm not saying they're necessarily thinking about this from day to day, because it's way too early to start thinking this way. But since you lost that series and you felt like you could have won it, now you got to flip a series probably, because that's a series loss at home. And in the SEC, you got to protect your home turf. So for South Carolina to kind of keep pace with what it wants to do, it's going to have to flip a road series probably. Can they flip this one? Does it have to come further down the road? Obviously, that's answer to come. Last series, talk about Mississippi State at Oklahoma. First SEC series in Norman, Oklahoma. So both Norman and Austin getting their first SEC series here. Oklahoma coming off a really impressive gritty series win against South Carolina that we just talked about. A ton of credit to the Sooners. Like, they just refused to lose that Sunday game. And there was, I think both sides got some weird, potentially bad. I wasn't watching. I was listening actually because I was driving. Some weird umpiring stuff in that game. I think both sides were victimized at various points, but just kind of, it was rainy. There was the threat of maybe the game having to get delayed because of storms in the area. And Oklahoma just fought through all that and won the game. Jason Walk with a big home run in extra innings. Can they do it again against a Mississippi State team that is going to be motivated? Because Mississippi State kind of needs this series. You get swept opening weekend. If you lose this one, you're at best 1-5. If you lose a series, every year there are SEC teams that dig themselves a hole and climb out of them. So they would by no means be dead in the water at 1-5. But certainly you don't want to put yourself in that kind of hole, especially because I don't know that this team has, last year with LSU, they fell in a 3-12 hole. And it was like, well, but this team is really talented. It was never about talent. The year before, Tennessee fell in a hole and it was never about talent. Mississippi State has plenty of talent. I'm not saying they're untalented, but on paper, they are not and were not as talented as those two teams I just talked about that put together those big comebacks. So they probably can't afford to get in quite as big a hole. So this series is kind of important. Obviously, being on the road makes it tough. I think this should be a fun atmosphere in Norman, given that it's the first SEC series in that ballpark at L. Dale Mitchell. Looking forward to watching along on that one. Should be a heck of a lot of fun. All right, a couple of comments came in here in the end. Caleb Falks is excited for my LSU Tigers versus Texas. We could make a statement on the road, see if Ianson and Shores can get a little deeper. Would love to see a healthy Guidry. Yeah, I think those are a lot of the storylines there. Ianson and Shores going to be really important. When do we see Gavin Guidry? Even if he comes back, I'm assuming there'll be like a little bit of a period where they're a little careful with him, with the idea that, hey, when we get to the meat and potatoes of SEC play in mid-April on, is he at full strength? I think that's kind of probably what there. So yeah, important stuff there. Caleb, you hit on a lot of stuff. And then Eric Simmons says, what's wrong with Texas A&M? And boy, Eric, if Michael Early knew, then first of all, have to be a lot smarter than I am to figure it all out. And Michael Early probably would have fixed it. By now, if he really knew. There's just a lot of things going wrong, Eric. Like, it's not any one thing. It's the defense hasn't been good. They're making some fundamental errors. They're making some mental errors. The offense hasn't been very good. They're obviously missing some pieces. It's just a lot of stuff. Eric also asked, LSU or Texas, who do you got? I think Texas wins 2 out of 3 since it's in Austin. Yeah, I think, Eric, that's fair. Just going with the home team. I think that's totally fair. I said earlier, I kind of honestly forgot who I picked in our D1 baseball picks. I'm going to have to go check. I believe I picked LSU, but I will have to check on that. Tennyson Tipton, never thought we'd be having the conversation where 1-5 might be a positive for A&M after Nashville. I am with you. I did not think we would get there. I also think you are correct that 1-5, 1-5 might not be the worst thing in the world. And look, it's a long season. You got 24 SEC games after this weekend. And all it would take, again, because talent, not a problem with A&M. Maybe they're not as overly talented as we thought they were, but they're still plenty talented. Let's not go overboard here. So they wouldn't have to play that much better to at least get back in things in the SEC. But man, you got to get going. Like, it just feels like they're so stuck in neutral. I know I don't need to tell you, I'm preaching to the choir there. Rob Sargent said, I'm so sad about A&M. Sad face. They were so much fun in that series against the Ducks late last season. Yeah, and it should be a fun team. That's one of the disappointing things about it. Like, it's veteran players who we've known. Everybody knows who Jay Laviolette is, who follows college baseball. Like, everybody knows who Ryan Prager is. It should be a fun team, and it just hasn't been. And that's a bummer. I agree there. All right, folks, that is going to do it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra in D1Baseball.com. Hope you enjoy the baseball this weekend. I know I will. Very much looking forward to it, while we all keep one eye on the basketball as well. You got to keep your head on a swivel this weekend. This is a tough weekend. We have SEC baseball games, NCAA tournament games, a lot of stuff going on. So you just have to have discipline with like keeping your eye on everything out there, because it's a lot coming at you. All right, folks. I will talk to you again tomorrow morning Saturday's edition of Weekend Waypoints. We will recap everything that happened in the league on Friday, and I will talk to you then.